You know, my wife and I, we're both caught in the relentless grind of our careers. I'm chained to an IT job and she's a budding lawyer, her days devoured by courtrooms and legal briefs. Our schedules are tight, leaving little room for the mundane necessities of life. We live in this modest 2 BHK apartment in Bangalore, and just 2 weeks ago we had to let go of our old maid. Unreliable she was, always taking off without a word, so we had no choice but to start the tiresome search for a new one. After a month of asking around, my wife finally found someone. Our neighbour in apartment 103B recommended her. Ella, she said her name was. And when I first laid eyes on Ella, something in me shifted. My wife, usually so composed, seemed almost small next to her. Ella, with her pale skin, those hauntingly beautiful eyes, her slim figure, it was all so captivating, in a way that felt both thrilling and, well, unsettling. I should have felt guilty, but can you really blame a man for being drawn to such an intoxicating presence? My mind started racing with thoughts I shouldn't have had. My wife, always away at the local court, left me alone in that apartment most of the day. Slowly I began to build a rapport with Ella, and from her shy, almost bashful gestures I could tell she was just as taken with me. Then, 2 weeks after we hired her, on a Tuesday evening, I made my move. We were sitting on the sofa, close enough to feel the tension in the air, and I leaned in to kiss her. But just as our lips were about to meet, the front door creaked open. My wife walked in, her face contorting in horror as she saw us. Her voice, usually calm, rose into a frantic scream, accusing Ella of seducing me. She spat out words laced with venom, but what struck me most was the strange insult she kept hurling, calling Ella an old hag. It felt wrong somehow. That night, after a storm of apologies, my wife forgave me. But her forgiveness came too easily, too quickly, and that left me feeling uneasy. She wasn't the type to let things go just like that. But one question kept gnawing at me, one I couldn't shake. "Why did you call Ella an old hag?" I asked her, my voice barely above a whisper. "She's young, isn't she?" My wife stared at me, her eyes dark and unreadable. "What the hell are you talking about? Are you out of your mind? Ella is old enough to be your grandmother. Wrinkled skin, white hair. She can barely walk without those frail knees giving out." I had no reply to that. My wife's words hung in the air, absurd and unsettling, and for a moment I considered that the shock of catching us might have driven her into some kind of delusion. Still, I decided to end the affair. It wasn't worth the risk, ruining my marriage, destroying the life we'd built. The thought of explaining the situation to my parents, who still saw me as their well-behaved, traditional son, was unbearable. So we agreed to keep Ella around. After all, losing a maid in this economy wasn't worth it over one indiscretion. At first, I chalked up my wife's bizarre comment about Ella's appearance to the stress of the situation. But as days passed, her claims became stranger, more unnerving. The second incident happened just yesterday. It started innocently enough. Ella was singing a lullaby to our 1-year-old son, her voice soft and melodic, the kind that could soothe any restless child. I remember lying down for a nap around 1 p.m, her gentle singing echoing through the apartment. When I awoke at 4 p.m, I realised something was off. Ella hadn't moved. For 4 hours she had been sitting in the same spot, rocking the red cradle back and forth, her voice never faltering. The lullaby she sang was beautiful but haunting, the words looping over and over. "Oh little baby, you're so cute. We will drown you in a well." I brushed it off at first, convincing myself it was just one of those odd village lullabies, the kind that don't make sense to city folk like us. But then, in my groggy state, something caught my eye, something that made my blood run cold. Ella's feet, they were turned backward. For a full minute I stared in disbelief, my heart pounding in my chest. Was it a trick of the light, a remnant of sleep clinging to my mind? I rubbed my eyes furiously, and when I looked again, her feet were normal. I must have imagined it. I had to have imagined it. Later that evening, I confronted my wife about not taking care of our son. After all, Ella was doing a better job than I was. But when I mentioned it, she looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "We have no son, and we really need to get you checked by a doctor." I blinked, staring at my wife in disbelief. "What? We have a 1-year-old? How could you forget? And you should be paying more attention to him. Ella cantó una nana a él durante 4 horas seguidas hoy. She's taking better care of him than you are, she sighed, her voice tinged with frustration. You're hallucinating, seeing things that aren't there. And another thing, Ella took a leave today. She sent me a message on WhatsApp, so whatever it is you keep seeing, it isn't Ella. It's just your brain going schizophrenic. My heart skipped a beat. But we have a son together. How could you just forget about him? That question anchored itself in my mind, blocking out the other strange incidents swirling around our home and my wife's increasingly fragile grip on reality. Making up lies about Ella was one thing, but denying our own child, that was a new low. Oh really? She shot back, her eyebrow arching. Then tell me the name of this son you keep talking about. What does he look like? What's his birth date? Where is he right now? Because I don't see any 1-year-old babies around here. And where's his toy box? His cradle? I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came. My mouth stretched wide, hanging open for what felt like an eternity, as I tried to summon these details, any detail, but my mind was blank. There was nothing. My wife watched me, a mix of anger and something like fear in her eyes, as the silence confirmed her suspicions. Finally, I managed to close my mouth, huffing in frustration before turning away to sleep. She left to sleep in the other bedroom, clearly not wanting to be near me, but that wasn't the end of it. The third incident was the breaking point. My wife came to me in tears, telling me she was going to leave. She claimed she saw Ella crawling on all fours across the walls of my bedroom last night. I shook my head, dismissing her words as another sign of her descent into madness. Yes, I had called Ella over last night around 1 a.m. Our son had been crying in the living room, and my wife had locked herself in her bedroom, completely oblivious. Ella came in and, with her soothing lullaby, managed to calm him down within 15 minutes, rocking his red cradle until silence settled over the apartment. After that, I slept soundly. But now, as I stood there, listening to my wife's frantic words, a cold chill crept up my spine. She was terrified, convinced she had seen something that defied reason. And for the first time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. I tried reasoning with my wife, telling her she was mistaken, but she just screamed at me. We do not have a child. I think we've invited a chudail into our house. If you want to live, get out of this house already. With that, she stormed out, sobbing, dragging her luggage with her. The door slammed shut, leaving me in an eerie silence. For those who don't know, a chudail is the Indian equivalent of a witch, a spectral being like the one from The Ring, except her most terrifying feature is her backward-facing feet. I shook my head, wondering if my wife would ever regain her grip on reality. Ella couldn't be a chudail. She was just a maid. Yet, as the minutes ticked by, a gnawing doubt began to eat at me. I needed to prove that my wife was the one losing her mind, not me. I tried to recall the events of the previous night, hoping to gather some solid proof, something tangible to show I wasn't losing it. I grabbed my phone, searching through my call logs and WhatsApp messages, hoping to find evidence that I had called Ella to take care of our son. But there was nothing. No call, no message. In fact, Ella's contact details were nowhere to be found on my phone. Frustration began to boil over. How could this be? I was sure I had called her. I had to have called her. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through my phone over and over, but it was useless. It was as if she had never existed. Exhaustion must have overtaken me, because the next thing I knew, I had fallen asleep, the phone still clutched in my hand. When I awoke, the room was bathed in the cold, bluish light of the night. The clock on the wall read 1 a.m. and a faint muffled sound echoed from the living room, a cry. My son. I stumbled out of bed, my heart pounding in my chest as I made my way toward the living room. There he was, lying in his red cradle, wailing in distress. I reached for my phone again, desperate to call Ella. She had always been able to soothe him, but as I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keypad, a chilling realization gripped me. I had no way to contact her. No number, no message thread, nothing. Yet I could hear the familiar sound of her lullaby faintly in the distance, growing louder with each step I took toward the living room. My son's cries grew louder, more desperate. The lullaby, soft, melodic, yet eerily off, wrapped around me like a suffocating fog. I stood frozen at the entrance to the living room, my breath catching in my throat, and then I saw her. Ella was standing there, in the dim light, beside the red cradle. Her back was to me, her long hair cascading down her slender frame. She was singing that same lullaby, rocking the cradle gently. But something was wrong. Her voice was distorted, warped, as if it was coming from somewhere far away, echoing through a tunnel. "Ella!" I whispered, my voice trembling. She didn't respond. Her body began to sway, unnaturally slow, and the lullaby continued. Only now, the words had changed. "Oh, little baby, you're so cute. We will drown you in a well." My blood ran cold as the room seemed to darken around me. I took a hesitant step forward, but as I did, Ella turned to face me. My breath hitched in my throat. Her eyes were hollow, empty voids, and her lips twisted into a grotesque smile. And then, as I looked down, I saw them. Her feet. They were turned backward. A scream clawed its way up my throat, but before it could escape, everything around me began to spin. The room distorted, twisting and turning, and the lullaby grew louder, more menacing. I stumbled back, trying to escape, but my legs felt like lead. Ella moved closer, her twisted smile widening, her hollow eyes fixed on me. "Ella, please. Stop," I begged. But my voice was barely a whisper, drowned out by the haunting melody. Suddenly, everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the floor, drenched in cold sweat. The room was silent. No crying, no lullaby, no Ella. I scrambled to my feet, searching for my son, but the cradle was empty. My heart pounded in my chest as I frantically searched the apartment, but there was no sign of him, no sign of anything that had happened. In the dead of night, the apartment felt like a tomb, cold, empty, lifeless. My phone buzzed, jolting me from my frantic search. I grabbed it, hoping against hope that it was a message from my wife, but it wasn't. It was a notification from WhatsApp, a message from an unknown number. Hand shaking, I opened it. The message was just one word: soon. And then I heard it again, the faint sound of a lullaby drifting through the air, getting closer.